out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to episode number 148 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf. And I will be joined, par usual, by my friend, cohort, co-host, and partner in crime, Gary Action Jackson from the East Coast of the United States of America. And longtime listeners know that we are into hard rock, classic rock, prog rock, heavy metal, early MTV, and more. And since I lived in the UK, we do a lot of dichotomy over how some bands make it big on one side of the pond, but not so much on the other. And it can go either way. It could even be British bands who make it in America, but not so big in the UK. It's just there's different cultures, there's different timing, and you never know when something might hit in one place, but maybe not so much in the other. And today we're going to review an album that might come as a little bit of a surprise because it's not really hard rock, it's not prog rock, it's not heavy metal. They were on MTV, and they're not really an English band or an American band. It's an amalgamation of them. In fact, it's a supergroup that nobody saw coming, and that's the Traveling Wilburys, made up of the Beatles' George Harrison, the legendary Bob Dylan, the extraordinary Roy Orbison, ELO's Jeff Lynne, and Tom Petty. I guess they were all friends. George wanted to work again, and they figured out a way to put together this extraordinary record. Probably did better in the US than it did in the UK, but it did well all around the world, really. Part of that's thanks to MTV, but I'll admit that we recorded this in the summer. We recorded it a ways back, and we've been doing so much heavy metal and hard rock stuff, I kind of wanted to break. I said, Jackson, how about we do the Traveling Wilburys first album? He was kind of like, huh? You want to do what now? But I have very fond memories of this. I remember listening to this on the radio, seeing it on MTV, and even though I was a rebellious teenager and wanted to listen to hard rock and heavy metal, it was something that my mother liked. So it was something we could have in common. Like, we're in the car, we don't have to fight over the radio when this comes on. It's like, oh, okay, this is great. Because the pedigree of the people in this band is extraordinary. And it really kind of kicked off an amazing run of creativity for all the members of the band. A lot of success, a lot of fun that they had in the ensuing years. And I think that being a part of this Traveling Wilburys band was huge for all of them. And so I thought it would be a fun one to discuss here on the show. Now, before we get into it, got to take care of a little bit of business. As usual, we love to mention that we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast family. It's a network of about 100 different shows, music related, not all rock and roll. There really is something in there for everyone. And you can check out more about them at pantheonpodcast.com or follow at Pantheon Pods. And of course, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Based in the UK, doing this for 40 years, folks. They have over 250,000 items in stock. They've got LPs, singles, CDs, posters, tour programs, ticket stubs, signed memorabilia, stuff from all over the world, things that you won't find at your local record store. And if you go to rarevinyl.com and use the code UGLY, U-G-L-Y, when you check out, you can save 10% off your orders. Now, that's a one-time discount. So don't just go in and buy a $6 CD. Go buy a treasure. Go buy something that's hard to find, something that you love, that's in great condition. Use the code UGLY, save a big 10%, and they will ship it to you anywhere around the world. Doesn't matter if you're in Austria or Australia, rarevinyl.com will get it to you in good shape. So use the code UGLY, save 10% at rarevinyl.com. Now back to the Wilburys. George Harrison, he had success on a Cloud9 album, and that was produced by Jeff Lynne of ELO fame. And he had so much fun, it's like, well, maybe we could do something with some other big-time singers. And I think George wanted to do something with Bob Dylan. I think Jeff wanted to do something with Roy Orbison. So they figure, hey, let's get them all together. And George had recently befriended Tom Petty. Of course, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers had recently toured with Bob Dylan. So they all kind of knew each other. There's kind of this confluence coming together, really, I think, spearheaded by George and his partner in crime, Jeff. And you can just hear that they're having some fun on this album, which to jaded old rock stars who've dealt with the pains of the record business and the record executives and A&R people, and to kind of have a little autonomy to go out and do something on their own, have some fun. I think it was a big deal for all of them. I think it changed their perspective in a way. And the success that followed, not only from this album, but what they all did in the ensuing years, this was the catalyst. This was very important to them. So I know it's a little bit different, but I think you'll like it. We're going to go over Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, track by track, here on The Wolf.
After weeks of hard rock and heavy metal.
Correct.
Thought it might be fun to take a break from some of that. Man cannot live on heavy metal alone. Although I know there's some people who fight, but honestly, it's an important part of our lives, but it's not the only part of our lives. I said, all right, well, let's try to mix it up a little bit. What else? What other albums are having some big anniversaries that we might be interested in talking about? And then I just kind of going through a few lists, I just happened to find the Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 is coming up on its 35th anniversary. I'm like, you know what? This is a fun album. I remember having this back in the day, obviously a huge supergroup. And we just watched that Tom Petty documentary on Wildflowers, which came out, 5 years after this album did. I thought, well, this will be fun because it blends so many different styles. It was something that I had and we listened to maybe a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit in college. And so I said, all right, Jackson, let's do Traveling Wilburys. And your reaction was, all right.
It was a little bit, I don't want to say, it was a surprising suggestion. Let me put it to you that way, because I had kind of, not that I forgot about this, but like I didn't never spend a lot of time with this record. They had a couple of big hits off of this that I remember, but the rest of the album really isn't like the stuff that you heard on the radio, which I was pleasantly surprised about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Obviously, yes, they had two big hits that they had big MTV produced videos for. And honestly, Volume 3 did have the same thing, had a few more. However, on Volume 3, I'm not sure that they picked the right songs as singles. There's some great songs on that one that never hit the singles chart. Whereas this one, I mean, the two big ones, which is Handled with Care and End of Line, the first and last songs on the album, fairly big hits in the U.S. The album itself went triple platinum in the U.S., even went platinum in the U.K., and did well in Canada and Australia and stuff like that. But there were some songs that did okay on like adult contemporary radio lists, or maybe got some good airplay time, but they weren't really big hits. And just the blending of all these musical styles. I mean, Bob Dylan is obviously very different from Roy Orbison, who is very different from, say, George Harrison. You know, Tom Petty kind of has his own thing going, and Jeff Lynne produces it all, right? He's kind of the multi-instrumentalist. And we got to talk about how all these guys came together. But this time from like 87 to 92 or so, saw all these guys really kind of blow up. And I think a lot of it has to do with this collaboration that they all got into.
That's what I was thinking about. I mean, because while Tom Petty would go on to do Full Moon Fever and, you know, Into the Great Wide Open and Wildflowers, like we were talking about, I mean, at this point in time, this was kind of a weird in-between section for a lot of these guys, including Bob Dylan. Like, he was around, but like that, he was yet to put out that Oh Mercy record that was big. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think like for people like us in that age group, like this record really kind of introduced us to a lot of or maybe reintroduced these guys to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at this point, we're 15 or so. And we love Van Halen, and we're starting to get into, you know, super guitar heroes. Obviously, Zeppelin was big for us, starting to get into Rush and stuff like this. But then, and I've been abandoning pop music for a few years now, just knowing that just what they play on the radio isn't all great. What MTV is pushing isn't always awesome. So I need to go out and find other music somehow. And it's when I started getting to like Police back catalog and Stones back catalog and things like that. But this one was, you know, came out pop. And was something my mother liked, and I liked it too, you know, because Tom Petty had been big. Don't Come Around Here No More had been a big hit for him, though I didn't love it. It was a big video for him. And of course, the guy who helped write that song, Dave Stewart, played a role in getting the Wilburys together because they went to Dave's kitchen, all five of them, with acoustic guitars and jammed out here. There's video of that. And like, whose kitchen is that? Well, that's Dave Stewart's. Like, he's not even in the band. He didn't even produce this. But it was, I guess it came from, George made it kind of a comeback album in 87 with Cloud9. Mm-hmm. Jeff Lynne produced it, had the big song, Got My Mind Set on You. That was a big one. And so they started to kind of hatch a plan in early 87. It's like, why don't we make a group of people we just really like, people we really want to be with, and that kind of thing. And George brought up Bob Dylan, and Jeff brought up Roy Orbison. So they started thinking about that. Meanwhile, Dylan was on tour with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Basically, Tom and the Heartbreakers were his backing band for, you know, which is kind of amazing if you think about it, but that's exactly what it was. And they did Europe like that. And I guess at the end of the tour, you know, they go to a party or something like that. It's Tom's birthday, and Dylan introduces him to George Harrison and like Ringo, you know, and Tom even, there's a great documentary that Martin Scorsese did. It's like, you know, I kind of got all these new friends. and I was kind of off on my own new adventure. Right? So then it kind of became, all right, they just kind of asked Roy to join, and they decided, let's make some of these songs and do something with it. And I also think it was born out of, they needed a B-side for a Harrison track. And then I don't know if it was End of the Line. It was one of those. Basically, the record company was like, this is too good to be a B-side on your solo album. And it's like, okay, yeah, we'll go in and do an album. And that's kind of where it started in LA, because that's where everyone had a place.
Yeah. And it was an interesting concept to think that at that point in time, George Harrison was kind of sick of being a solo artist. He wanted a band around him. He wanted to write songs with guys who were his contemporaries and put something out that he was a part of instead of having to do everything on his own. And especially guys like this, like, I guess he was a big fanboy of Roy Orbison, who was kind of an odd duck in the rock and roll pantheon of, the original guys. He's kind of nerdy looking. He was very soft spoken. He wrote songs about like heartache and pain and not like, all the girls I've loved before.
Right.
Huge influence on like Bruce Springsteen.
Yep.
And I think Springsteen introduced him in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But yeah, and a dude who was, when did he die? He was 52 when he died. So that he was late 40s, early 50s when he was doing this. Could still sing extremely well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think you're right. I think it was a huge influence on everyone who became artists in the 60s. Everyone loved Roy Orbison. He still had that beautiful voice. But you're right. I mean, it was a bunch of mellow ballads for the most part, and like Elvis went on to be huge, and Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, whoever you want to throw in there. And then Roy, once the Beatles, ironically, and Dylan came along, I think he hadn't had a hit since like the mid 60s. So he kind of plodded along, just kind of doing his old hits and playing where he wanted to and that kind of thing. I think out of all the guys, he was the one who was the most excited about the success of this album, because he really hadn't had anything in a couple of decades. Whereas Dylan, he got big in the 70s and he kind of went away. He did his Christian music. He came back in the 80s to do some good albums. They didn't really get huge. Obviously, Tom and the Heartbreakers were big at the beginning of the 80s. By the late 80s, they were kind of trailing. And George he'd shunned the light. I mean, he didn't ever want to tour. And he made an album in 81 or 82 or something like that wasn't huge. So, and obviously ELO hadn't been together for a while. So I don't know. It was just this convergence of all this talent. And I think what also made it really work, Jackson, is they checked their egos at the door. They didn't, say, this is my song, you're going to do it my way. They all just kind of said, all right, we're going to get to do this and see what happens.
Yeah, they had about a 20 or 25 minute video. I don't know what it was included with, but it showed part of the recording thing. Like you were saying, they showed them in Dave Stewart's kitchen, and yet that's what it looked like. It looked like they would just kind of sit around and collaborate. Some of it was, you sing this part, see if it works. Somebody else sings it, see who sounds better. So yeah, it really seemed like they were there to work together and not kind of step all over each other. Although it's interesting because Jeff Lynne was a fan of the Beatles, and I'm sure as was Tom Petty. And, then you've got Harrison, who was a fan of Orbison. So everybody's a fanboy of somebody in this room.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And it looked like they really did take each other's advice. Now, the songs are all credited to the Traveling Wilburys. However, if you dig in and see which publishing company the songs went to, you can kind of tell who wrote them. And sometimes you can kind of tell anyway. I feel like the George Harrison songs really stick out because they're kind of bright and cheery and have those chord progressions that you're used to. You can kind of tell the Dylan stuff because not only is he singing lead on it, but it kind of has that Dylan-esque storytelling about it. So you can kind of tell who wrote which ones. But like you said on that video, which eventually they put out like a Wilburys collection, which had the first two albums, plus some singles and some unreleased stuff that they didn't put out, plus a video. And I think George put together the video for record company people. I don't know if he ever intended it to go out to the public or not. But, I mean, you can see him in the studio. And Jeff Lynne is like giving Dylan some direction, when he's in the box doing his vocals. And George's like, or let's try this. And Bob's like, yeah, we'll do it your way. So, and that's a guy who doesn't really like to take a whole lot of direction, as you know. But I think there was so much mutual respect here. Jeff and George did do the producing, with Jeff basically being the engineer on it.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that. I knew that Jeff had produced Tom Petty a lot. I didn't realize that he worked on the Cloud 9 record, and then he would go on to work with pretty much all the rest of these dudes in some capacity. And we've talked about this before. Really, when you talk about Jeff Lynne, he's more of in the production side than, I mean, ELO had hits, but I mean, really, his contribution to rock and roll was more on the production side.
Yeah, and when they put ELO in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I was a little surprised because they were pushing to put Chic in the Hall of Fame all those years, because Nile Rodgers deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for all his work as a songwriter and a producer, not to mention the songs he made Chic. And they couldn't get in, and they kind of made a special thing like, special contributor Nile Rodgers or something like that. And I said, that's what they ought to do for Jeff Lynne. I don't know that ELO is really a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band, but Jeff Lynne is a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, thanks to what he did in ELO and as a producer later on, all that. And then they went ahead and let ELO in anyway. I thought that smacked of racism, but we're not going to get into that right now.
It's a whole different show.
Yeah, it's a different show altogether. But then they all love this so much that, they all worked on, except for Dylan, Roy Orbison's Mystery Girl, which is kind of his comeback album, which we'll talk a little bit about here later. But yeah, they all worked together on Full Moon Fever, with Harrison contributing some, and obviously Jeff Lynne doing the production. There's a song that George did called Cheer Down, which I'm fairly certain ended up on the Lethal Weapon 2 soundtrack. You can kind of hear it in the credits at the end. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's George Harrison. Well, it turns out, he and Jeff and Tom wrote that together, as they did. And then Jeff and Tom wrote You Got It, which is Roy's big hit on Mystery Girl with Roy. Harrison contributed to Dylan's Under the Red Sky album, which came out in 1990. So, all of a sudden, they're all kind of hot together.
Yeah, and it's interesting how this collaboration permeated through the albums that you just mentioned. So yeah, I mean, it definitely seemed like they did like working together. They really thought of themselves as compatriots and valued members of the songwriting process.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just, I think once you get rolling, it's just you realize that this guy's on the same page. Like we can put things together. Like there was one of these things, one of the tracks that Dylan sings lead on, I don't remember what it was, but he was in the recording booth and he's got his little notebook with him. And they're like, yeah, he writes really small. Like you can't even really see what he's, the deal on there. And he's changing up the lyrics there, and they're watching, giving him the thumbs up. Like, yeah, he'll change one line. And I think that was one thing that really came through, as far as like, Dylan doesn't have the greatest voice in the world, but he can write lyrics.
Oh my God.
That's his deal. It's like, it's just like, yeah, like how did you come up with that? Like one phrase or one line that you just nailed it every single time.
Yeah, I mean, his talent is not as a singer. His talent is as a songwriter. And obviously so many people have covered his stuff, and sometimes they make it a lot better. Obviously, Jimi Hendrix with All Along the Watchtower jumps to mind immediately. But there's a heck of a lot of songs like that, And then, they worked on Dylan's 30th anniversary celebration, Christmas All Over, which is, I love that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers Christmas song. A lot of the rock and roll Christmas songs get old to me. I guess who worked on that? Well, it was Jeff Lynne, right? And when the Beatles released Free as a Bird, who helped produce that? Well, it was Jeff Lynne, and they had a Roy Orbison posthumous album to do. It was Jeff Lynne, so he's all over the place here. And I really like his voice.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it's kind of, it's not super dynamic. Like he's got a box that he fits in, but especially in this context, he goes along really well with everybody else's. And on Dylan's stuff, he can't sing other stuff, but he can sing Bob Dylan stuff really well. It's like Keith, like Keith doesn't have the greatest voice, but he on his songs, he sounds fantastic.
Yeah. And I think this really invigorated George to be like, okay, I don't have to do it the way where everything just says George Harrison, it's all on me. I can be more collaborative. I don't have to be this precious Beatle in his own little box somewhere. I can be part of something again.
Yeah. And to me on this record, it really kind of hammered home how his voice really is synonymous with rock and roll also. Like I know John Lennon, okay, we know Paul McCartney. Those were the two guys in the Beatles who did the big stuff, or the bulk of it. But when Harrison sings, you're like, yeah, his voice is pretty, it can go toe to toe with those guys.
And the harmonies between all of them kind of throughout all of these songs really is pretty magical.
Yeah.
It's pretty special.
Yeah, they fit in very well together. The only one I will say that kind of doesn't is Orbison, but only because it's like his is so much more different and more powerful than the rest of them. It's kind of hard to it's almost kind of hard to contain that one voice.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why they give him some good lead breaks on a lot of these songs. But we talk about checking their egos at the door. There's kind of a story where George says, look, we all know you're Bob Dylan, but we're going to treat you like we treat everybody else, And Bob actually kind of pushed back a little and said, hey, I'm in awe of you. You guys don't need to be in awe. Especially Roy, and I'm sure to some degree George. It's like, it'll work the same way. But they really kind of had to work around Dylan's touring schedule, because at that point, Dylan was kind of touring relentlessly and still cranking out albums. And so, they kind of had to fit in with him, I feel like. But it was like all the rest of them seemed to, they're mostly LA guys. I mean, I think Bob had a place in Malibu and they may have used his studio in there to do some stuff. But I feel like the other four guys kind of all got along, and Dylan's kind of the outlier.
Which would make sense, but it seemed to all come together. And like you said, it seemed like I'm sure they had disagreements, whatever, but it really seemed like they enjoyed being part of something that was bigger than just one person.
Yeah, and apparently they bonded over like Monty Python sketches. Of course, George knows those guys really well. He financed their films, he buddies with all of them.
Yeah.
But it was like amazing how Roy, you see, but maybe that's the generation behind him. Maybe he wouldn't catch on to all that. He can recite a whole skit, and it was like, they're amazing. Like, Roy knows these things like inside and out. It's unbelievable. But in another throw to kind of dampen down their egos, they all gave themselves pseudonyms for the record. So, like, George was Nelson Wilbury, and Lynne was Otis Wilbury. And Tom, being the younger one, he was Charlie T. Wilbury Jr. Roy was Lefty and Bob was Lucky. And then for Volume 3, they changed their names again, and Jim Keltner, who played the drums, who was George Harrison's longtime confidant and bandmate in his solo albums. In fact, when George had to become a solo artist and then create a fan club, he basically made it to Jim Keltner. It's like send a self-undressed elephant instead of a self-addressed envelope to, and instead of George Harrison, it was like the Jim Keltner fan club or whatever. So he's been around, he's played with everybody, and he's in the videos. You can see him on both these videos. He's solid, he's rock solid. It must have been a lot of fun for him to be able, and he's he's Buster Sideberry. That's who he's credited as on the record. So it must have been fun for him to be around all these folks.
Yeah, and there was the legend of the Traveling Wilburys or something about how they were from this place, or they made up this story. So yeah, they were just goofing around, having a good time. And I think they were all supposed to be like brothers or cousins or something from some backwoods place or something. I don't know, but it speaks to the fact that they were all just having fun on this record.
Yeah, and I think even the name Wilbury came from the idea that, like, oh, that's not quite right. It's like, we'll bury that in the mix. We'll bury that in the production, and that just kind of became Wilbury. And then back to the Monty Python thing, I mean, Michael Palin, as Hugh Jampton, did the album liner notes, and then Eric Idle did the liner notes for Volume 3. In fact, he appeared in the Wilbury Twist video on Volume 3 with John Candy. So they're obviously having a little fun here. It's not so serious. And I think it's like the record company couldn't mess with them because there's too much firepower for them to come in and say, okay, now maybe you should record this differently. Maybe you try this. There's no A&R man like hovering over the shoulder.
Yeah, like, I don't hear a single here. We gotta put something together.
Yeah, so I think that made George really happy, and I know that makes Tom Petty happy as well. So I feel like they were left on their own to go do something fun, and some great stuff came out.
Yeah, and get to hang out with people who they normally would not. I mean, if you put a George Harrison record together, right? Like, he could pretty much get whoever he wanted to play backup for him. But to have people who were, his either his contemporaries or people that he idolized, that was kind of a whole nother level for all these guys, I think.
I think so.
There was a great story about, I think it was Peter Frampton got asked to be on one of Harrison's records, and he comes in and, he's all ready to go, and Harrison is there, and he's, says, oh, hey, Pete. And Frampton's like, oh my God, he knows who I am. He knows my name. But like this is a whole different. I mean, no offense to Peter Frampton, but this is a whole nother level with getting to work with these guys.
No, and I remember that story. He's like, he started strumming along, and he's like, "No, Peter, you're playing lead. I'm playing rhythm. Like that's why you're here." And because Peter's like, "This is George Harrison. I got to defer to him." He's like, "No, man, you do your thing. That's why I want you here, not for you to strum along."
Hi, this is Jim Cregan, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London, and they're just the best.
All right, well, we better get into some of these tracks here.
Okay.
5 songs per side. I only ever had this on CD, but first song, Handled with Care, first single, and the story goes that they're at Bob Dylan's, I think, in his recording studio, and they're like, "What are we doing, George?" He goes, "Well, we got a song." And he saw a box that said Handled with Care. He's like, "It's called Handled with Care. I've got all these songwriters here. Let's go. Let's get it together. Let's get a song going." And then, they start throwing out lines. Like, no, that's not going to be thrown out. Oh, yeah, that's pretty good, that kind of thing. This does get credited to Harrison's publishing. But I just remember the video, right? They're in kind of an abandoned old warehouse or something like that, and they're all standing in a circle with the kind of center mic drop above them, and they take turns stepping up and stepping back to sing their parts. And I just remember the star power of this video is unbelievable.
Right. And I think I remember, I mean, I knew everybody in there, but I had really never heard Orbison sing on anything that was relatively new, like the old stuff, like Only the Lonely. But yeah, right. I remember thinking to myself, and at that point in time, I thought he was, probably 70 when he was really only, late 40s. Exactly. I'm like, damn, that guy can really still sing.
I know. And they talk about how that, like, hey, we're all friends with him and we're all having dinner together, But then when he goes and gets on the mic and sings into the camera, oh, shit, that's Roy Orbison. And he is still amazing. I can't believe I'm friends with him. Can you believe we got him in this band? Because, again, the story goes that, like, Jeff and George and Tom went to, like, a Roy Orbison show in L.A. And before the show, they asked him to join. And of course he said yes. And then they went out and he did the show. It was like, and it was incredible. And they're like punching each other. Like, can you believe we got him in the band? Can you understand this? This is unbelievable. But this is a Harrison song in that he starts the vocals out. He's first on lead, and he has the big slide guitar throw. That is George playing slide,
which I didn't know. I mean, I kind of thought, perhaps maybe listening to this, that Mike Campbell was hanging around somewhere. He was not. So yeah, all these guys, there really isn't a whole lot of extra personnel on this other than the percussion.
Being beat up and battered around, being sent up and I've been shut down. You're the best thing that I've ever found. Handle me with care.
Right. Ray Cooper, who, is kind of a legend, and I saw him play with Eric Clapton on the Journey before. He added a little bit to Keltner. But that's really about it. Jim Horn on sax, not too many others. And like you see in the video, George is playing slide. Dylan's strumming a 12-string. Mm-hmm. And Petty plays the bass, and that was really his role as an instrumentalist in the Wilburys, was playing the bass on all these songs.
Which is interesting because that's not his deal in his band, but I guess it's one of those like, yeah, I really can't. I'm not going to compete with the rest of these guys on guitar, so what can I do?
Yeah, you can only layer so many guitars in there. Mm-hmm. Like My Sweet Lord, they had layered like 12 or something on there, but you don't need that much. And so, yeah, and then Lynne's plugged in his guitar. Of course, he can play a little piano if need be, and so, yeah, George is singing, and then there's the break, and Bob and Tom sing together, right?
Yeah.
Got somebody. And then Roy and Jeff kind of lend a little bit to that, and then they do their thing. With Roy getting a chance to shine, I'm so tired of being low. I mean, to have all these different voices in it is kind of amazing. And the second break, it's Roy and Jeff who are leading, with Bob and Tom kind of coming in to back them up. So there's a lot of balance here, and even Dylan breaks out his harmonica a little bit at the end.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of thought this whole record was going to be, and I'm glad they didn't do that, because on one or two, or I guess maybe 3 tracks on this one is where they kind of all go back and forth as like lead singers. Having to fit that into every song, I think, would have been tiresome. But on this one, especially being the lead single, I think they do a really good job at getting everybody a chance to shine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very collaborative, and the single did pretty well. I mean, went to 2 on album rock tracks in America, 30 adult contemporary, 45 on the Hot 100, made about top 20 in the UK. And top 10 and 20 in some places around the world, and the video certainly helped that, and so, hey, that's great. I mean, that's super cool. It's great that they achieved some success here. And it was back with Margarita, which is on side 2 or, later in the album, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think they were all pretty psyched about it. And I think especially Roy was psyched about it because Roy hadn't been on the charts in a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Whereas Petty's, been on the charts a lot. Dylan gets on the charts and then he fades. George can care less about the charts. He kind of automatically gets in there. Anything he does. Seriously, there's so many Beatles fans out there that they're going to buy anything that he does at some point. But I think Roy was really chuffed, like, hey, man, the album went up high in the charts and was doing well. And he was, it went to number 1 in Australia and Canada. It went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. So he was pretty psyched about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it sold 3 million in the United States, which is nothing to sneeze at. And yeah, basically made him extremely relevant again. And then, I mean, unfortunately, he wouldn't last on this earth that much longer. But you had mentioned, Mystery Girl. That was a big hit record for him. I think in 89 or maybe 90 when that came out, right after this. And so, yeah, I mean, basically in 1 second, his career was back.
Yeah, I mean, and this won a Grammy, for best rock performance by a group with vocal. I mean, did great. Now, yeah, Mystery Girl, sadly, it was his biggest selling album ever, and it came out after he died. But they had enough of him doing the song in the studio that they shot a video.
Right. And I mean, so for all of the awful things that happened to him in his life, personal tragedies, for him to be able to go out on top was a huge plus for him, I believe. And, he was happy. He was back to being relevant, back to being, more of a household name, even though his life was cut short. I think he was only 52 when he died. It was, if you had to pick it, that's the way you'd want to go out.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And there's a funny thing in that Tom Petty documentary where it's like, I guess George had called up Tom, about how Roy died. And Tom goes, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you what he said, but I'm going to tell you anything. He goes, aren't you glad it wasn't you? And Tom's like, well, yeah, I am, quite frankly. And then George goes, he'll be all right. George was very, very spiritual man. Olivia said that when he died, the room lit up like his spirit shone a great big light. I don't know about all. I hope it's true, but I don't know. But that's the way he was, and so he believed that you would live on some way, and that your spirit will be okay. And so he said, yeah, Roy will be okay. And I'm just glad that he was included in this video, his first hit in a long time.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Second song is "Dirty World" with Dylan on lead vocals, and the other guys helping to fill in here a little bit. What was your take from this second song on the record?
This was, like I said, this was a little bit strange to me, or not strange, but it was interesting how we kind of shift gears now. Cause I mean, this really is a Bob Dylan song. He is, if you work the math backwards, he is credited with writing this, or his publishing company is.
That's right.
I mean, it fits his vocal styles well. I did like the part about how in that video, they were showing how the percussion was done on anything that they could find, up to and including the refrigerator shelves. Like they're just beating on things to make interesting sounds. And I like the call and response element of this too. And then they go into the random lines from, I think, magazines or whatever that were lying around. Yeah. I think it's kind of cool.
It's funny, yeah. No, I mean, it's kind of got an acoustic chug to it, and he's singing, to a woman about some other dude that loves her, I guess. But then, at the end, they're talking about, he loves your big refrigerator. He loves your, and it's a lot of car stuff. It's like power steering and, parts service and stuff like that. There must have been a car flyer. or something like that. But yeah, it's fun, and everyone's singing together. Yes, Dylan's on lead. There's a little bit of a false ending to the song, and then it comes back a little bit, and you hear Harrison singing, "It's a Dirty World."
Love when you hold it, grab him from behind. Oh, baby, you're such a pretty thing. I can't wait to introduce you to the other members of my gang. You don't need no wax job, you're smooth enough for me. If you need your oil change, I'll do it for you free.
So yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't know if I call it a gear shifter or not, but it's definitely different from Handle the Care. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because on that first track where Dylan is on there, he's singing kind of backup in harmonies, and this one he takes lead, so you can already tell, okay, this is what we're going to do here. We're gonna switch people around and give everybody a chance. And I do like that part in the video where they're standing around doing the lines. Mm-hmm. And it looks like they recorded all at one time and they're just taking turns stepping up, saying their lines, stepping back. And I don't know whether they randomly got them or what, how they distributed them, but it just looked like they were having fun.
Exactly. They're having fun together. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's something that always happens. And this is an upbeat song. Not all of Dylan's songs are always upbeat. This is upbeat with horns, and then you're right, to see them at the end, especially when you see them recording it, where they're taking turns saying these odd, weird little things. It's like they're cracking each other up. They're just having fun. It's like we would eat dinner and then we would go sing. I'm like, that sounds like a
Yeah, and especially in a world where they could have potentially just recorded a lot of the stuff independently and spliced it all together and come up with something. The fact that they did hang out together and have dinner and write and collaborate and record it together, I think makes this record a little more special also.
Absolutely. Now the third song is Rattle. This is a little bit faster. I kind of liken it to a 50s kind of skiffle song, with the way that the chug of the guitars and stuff like that. Real simple solo. George didn't try to outdo himself. He kind of did a solo that kind of fits that era of songwriting.
Yeah. And this one definitely sounds like 50s inspired. And a couple of these songs actually do. And I don't know if that was having Orbison there as kind of a callback. But yeah, it kind of sounds like you've got those like twangy Johnny Cash guitars on this one.
Yeah. And 50s, look, that's right up Jeff Lynne's alley. Right?
Yeah.
In the 70s, he was doing 50s stuff. And he did write it. This is a Jeff Wright, But you hear Roy doing his, cat calls and stuff like that. Tom throws in a little bit here. I mean, look, it's not my favorite song, but it's a fun one. It's the shortest song on the album. It's barely 3 minutes. And it's got a good rhythm to it. Basically, it's Jeff and Tom here. I don't know if Dylan really did much on this song, to be honest with you. But, hey, it's a good one. It's fast paced and, kind of falls in the middle of side one here.
Right. And it's, we're changed up again to have Lynne on the lead, which he doesn't really sing lead a whole bunch on this one. So it's a nice change and it's different than the track before it. So we're kind of moving. We're not getting set in any one genre or any one, person singing lead from one track to the next.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And Jeff doesn't need to. He's producing everything. He's helping to write the songs. George has got a distinct voice. Dylan's got a distinct voice. Roy obviously does. Mm-hmm. And Tom makes hits. So he doesn't need to sing a lot of lead on here. And he contributes a lot to the harmony, but he has some power in his voice. When he comes on, his range might not be huge, but his timbre and everything, it comes through very well.
Absolutely.
Now, the fourth track, I really like. This could have been a single as far as I'm concerned, and it's a good story song. It's a Tom Petty write. I
kind of thought this was a single, to be honest. And I look, because I remember hearing it, and so I'm like, well, okay, this was the third single, but apparently not. But you're right. I don't know why they didn't release it.
And maybe it got some airplay, and we did hear it on the radio at some point, It's got Tom telling a story about how he met a girl. And it's got a boo-doo-doo, boo-doo-doo, boo-doo-doo. It's got a fun little bass groove to it.
Yeah, like an island groove, kind of.
A little bit. There's another one later that I think there's a huge island groove on. But yeah, it's not the typical groove for any of these guys, really.
Yeah.
And then they all sing the chorus. The thing is, Petty would do like 4 lines, and then everybody would go, last night. That would be like the chorus. So the chorus is kind of throughout. It's not like there's 3 parts of the chorus. There's chorus all over the place. But then there would be a break for Roy to come in, where they kind of shift it. They go to minor chords. And they kind of
it's a little darker when he comes in.
Exactly, they're kind of portending some bad things happening. And of course, the second time he does it, like she pulls out a knife, says "your money or your life," and I'm like, yeah, that's the darker side. But his voice is so smooth on it. It's like you're being delivered this ominous bad news in the sweetest way possible by Roy.
Well. And it almost sounds like you're sitting at a bar telling your friend this story. Let me tell you about this crazy thing that
exactly what it is.
Last night. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She was there at the bar. She heard my guitar. She was long and tall. She was the queen of them all. Last night, thinking about last night.
And then it's almost like, people are trying to like one up each other.
And he's been saying about now, I'm back in the bar. It's like it's the next day. It's like, I went to the bar last night, picked up a chick. She tried to kill me. And I'm back again. Because that was last night.
Yeah.
More nights to come. So, yeah, I really like this one. And it kind of shows you where Tom Petty is as a songwriter, because Full Moon Fever is coming out next, which sold a squadrillion copies. And it's something like that. It's something crazy. So he and of course on Volume 3, which was the second album, I feel like Petty had really kind of taken over. They don't have Roy anymore, and he did a lot of the songwriting and a lot of the singing too on Volume 3. And probably for good reason. Like, okay, Tom has had the biggest album that any of us have ever had with Full Moon Fever, right? So let's kind of defer to that.
Now, the too bad part about Volume 3 was that they did want Del Shannon, for the Runaway fame, to be on that record.
Yeah.
And he tragically ended his life. So they went in with a 4-part. I just wonder what they would have done with him, to kind of stretch things out. Because you're right. It was a little bit, you could definitely tell there was something, the magic just wasn't there exactly the same.
Right.
With the second record they call Volume 3 without Orbison.
I agree with you totally. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and Jeff did cover Runaway as like a bonus track that you get with that box set collection or whatever you want to call it. That Tom Petty poached Howie Epstein, his longtime bassist, from Del Shannon.
No, I didn't know that. But that's interesting.
Yeah, when Ron left the band, he needed a new bass player, and Tom was friends with Del, and I guess Howie had kind of become his musical director and kind of lead backing vocalist or whatever. And Tom was like, I want Howie. And Del was kind of pissed off at him. He's like, Tom, you can go get anyone you want, and you got to take Howie from me. And he's like, Del, I'm taking Howie. And he got over it, sort of. But see, bringing in the Wilburys would have been a way to make up for that.
Right.
But Del couldn't stand the fact that he was not getting any love anymore. He couldn't get a record contract. He was that one hit from decades ago, 3 decades ago. And he sadly took his own life before they could say, hey, you want to come along and be with us. Of course, Howie basically ended up taking his own life because he succumbed to heroin, which is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really sad. It was interesting because I didn't really realize how, going back to that Wildflowers documentary, I mean, I knew Howie Epstein. I knew he'd been in the band. I didn't realize how much he sang backup.
Yeah.
Tom. So that was an interesting nugget of information.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tom loved singing backup with him.
Mm-hmm.
But, he was also kind of mercurial. Like, when Tom was working on a solo album, he's like, they were working on a song one day. Now he's like, I don't get this song. I don't like it, and I don't want to sing on it. And Tom's like, well, okay, if you don't want to sing on it, you don't have to. He's like, yeah. And he split. Yeah, that song was Free Falling.
Doe.
So, he had his issues, I guess. Mm-hmm. God bless it. Anyway, the fifth song, the last of the first song, not alone anymore. This is a vehicle for Roy's beautiful voice.
Correct. I know that this one's credited to Lynne. This is Jeff Lynne writing a song for Roy Orbison.
For Roy, yeah.
And I know that there was some footage where they're saying, well, we didn't really know who was going to sing what. We kind of take turns and see who came out, who sounded the best. I can't imagine that was the deal on this song. It sounds like Lynne wrote that for him because it's right in his wheelhouse.
Absolutely. No, he wrote a Roy Orbison song for Roy. Mm-hmm. And this is the last, before they did You Got It on Mystery Girl, this is kind of Roy's last thing that he did purely for him while he was alive. It's a soaring ballad. It's a great song for him. But apparently there was a first version that had like a different arrangement on it. And maybe different chord progressions on it. And everyone's like, especially Tom, was like, nah, this song's not good. This isn't right. And then Jeff and Roy are like, oh man, this is great. So Jeff changed it up and he put in some acoustic stuff on it. And like the next day, like the chords, all of a sudden Roy's voice stuck out more and it made more sense. And like, oh, now we love it. Now it's awesome. So then they fix it up. And so, yeah. And so that's how that song worked out. It's always amazing to hear how in demo form, it wasn't the same and wasn't very good, apparently.
Yeah, right. How did you get to the final thing? And you start off, because I think demos are just a way to find kind of the edges of what you're looking for. And then you just kind of layer it and you try different things. And then you come up with the final product that is sometimes not even close to being what the demo was.
True that. Absolutely. So, all right, Roy gets his time to shine on here. Just him, thanks to Jeff Lynne. Now, you flip to the second side, although it was, I never had the second side of the CD as far as I'm concerned. Congratulations.
Yes.
I never liked this one.
Okay, why did you not like it?
Okay, I think, honestly, first of all, it's a little slow. Mm-hmm. Secondly, when I first heard this in like 1989, I was not a huge Bob Dylan fan, and I didn't know his work that well, to be perfectly honest. Listening to it now, I have a greater appreciation for it. Obviously that's Bob doing his thing. It's a Bob song. He wrote it. But yeah, congratulations. The chorus is not great to me. Yeah, he's a great songwriter, obviously not a great singer. The song is better than I remember it, but it's just, if there's any one that I probably wouldn't keep from the album, this would be the one.
I would say the same thing probably in 1988. Now listening to it for this show, I kind of like it because it's just a giant middle finger, like he's, oh, congratulations for breaking my heart. And it's Dylan, like he's just like in that. I don't think anybody else could have sung this one the way that he does, because he's just like at that gravelly voice, and you've got that call and response thing where he's, they say congratulations and then he gives you the line. Yeah, definitely a beast, not a B-side, but a album track.
But it is a B-side. It was the B-side to End of the Line.
Oh, what? Oh, okay. Well, there you have it then.
See,
yeah. Yeah. Interesting song. Not the one that I'm in love with, but it is nice to hear Dylan sing on this, one of his own songs.
Congratulations for breaking my heart. Congratulations for tearing it all apart. Congratulations.
Yeah, look, George has a nice little slide bit at the beginning that I like. There's some orchestration there at the end. I just, it's not a great song, and it's like, I get it. It's congratulations for breaking my heart. It's not an actual congratulations, but it's kind of like, To me, Happy Birthday is one of the worst songs ever written. It sounds like something they play when you lose on a game show. You know, it's like, I'm sorry, the answer is lower motor neurons. Better luck next time. Wah, 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 wah. You know, it's a horrible song. This is like, congratulations. You know, it's that kind of is where it is for me.
All right, so you're hitting the skip button on that one.
Pretty much. Although I was glad to listen to it because I had skipped it so many times in my life to listen to the whole thing. It's like, okay, there's some good elements to this song. This isn't a total throwaway, but still don't love it.
Hey, this is Scott Holiday from the Rival Sons. You're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
But then comes in Heading for the Light, which I think is a beautiful song, a wonderful sentiment, and obviously a George Harrison song.
But also obviously a Jeff Lynne had his finger in this too, because it sounds like, what if George Harrison was in the Electric Light Orchestra? Well, it would sound like this.
Oh, my hands were tied, jokers and fools on either side. Oh, still I kept on till the worst had gone. Now I see the whole I will see. My shoes are worn out, walking down this same highway. I don't see nothing new, but I feel a lot of change.
Yeah, no, the harmony from Jeff on this is huge. In fact, in the harmony, you can almost not even hear George.
Yes, correct.
Jeff is so like up in the mix.
Yeah,
but you can kind of tell it's like he's singing about heading for the light, like coming back to the light. Maybe it's talking about spiritually, but I also feel like it's talking about professionally. Like I'm coming back to a place where I don't resent the fact that I have to make pop records, where I don't, resent the fact like I get to work with people I'm happy about working with, and working with Jeff on Cloud 9, I think was a big thing for him. Got My Mind Set On You was a very upbeat song, and it was a hit for him. And I think that
it was a #1 hit, wasn't it?
Probably.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It was big. I remember the video with all the weird animals moving their mouths. Like the taxidermy guy must have had a blast with that. But, I think it's him being back to the light spiritually, back to the light professionally. There's no record company people to mess with it, and there's kind of a syncopated, guitar or dobro, something like that at the beginning, which makes it a little different. Yeah. It also has a false ending where it kind of fades back in. You got Jim Horn blowing his sax on it. So I love this one. If there's a 10-song best of the Wilburys, this would definitely be on it for me.
Yeah, and this is a nice one to find on the album also. You know the singles, but to hear Harrison singing like he's really having a good time is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sad when a great artist decides he doesn't really want to do it anymore. And I think he became jaded by fame. He didn't really want fame anymore. He became jaded by the record industry. But then, of course, he still has an opportunity to express himself.
Yeah, and I think he also kind of got hosed on his movie deal too. His Handmade Pictures. He had a couple that were difficult to make. I think he had problems with Terry Gilliam, and he definitely had problems with Sean Penn. And he was, I think, at this point in time, he was just kind of burned out on the whole fame and entertainment business.
Yeah, I think so. So I think being able, this was like a light at the end of the tunnel. I was like, this is actually fun. I remember enjoying making music. I remember enjoying working.
But think about that for a minute though too. Like when you watched Get Back, which was pretty much the end of the Beatles. I mean, did it look like he was having a whole lot of fun there? Even
he was 25 or 26 at that point. Now he's in his mid-40s. Which again, at this point, there really hadn't been any rock stars in their mid-40s. The genre wasn't old enough for them to be. Not to mention Elvis is dead, and a lot of people from like that era. Well, they were relegated to way the sidelines. Yeah, like Little Richard's still alive, but he's not on the charts, right. And he's playing, small clubs and stuff like that. So there really were no middle-aged rock stars yet. And so they're proving, hey, we can still do this despite our age.
Right. And not only be like a legacy act, like here's new stuff that can go onto the radio and be a number one hit. Yeah, you're right. This was kind of the dawn of classic rock radio.
And and new classic rock.
Right.
So it's not long after this, that Steel Wheels comes out for the Stones, and they're having a big comeback. It's like, hey, yeah, we're in our early to mid 40s, but we can still be relevant. Yeah,
absolutely.
So now the next track, Margarita, this is the B-side to Handle with Care. This one I feel like is very different from everything else on the album because it's got that synth to start out.
Yeah, very interesting. And there's a lot of instrumental parts in this, not a lot of lyrics.
Yeah, it's almost an instrumental, not quite, but I mean, George put some nice slide on here that I've always liked. Dylan takes the lead, but this is the one that kind of has a calypso island vibe to it to me.
Yeah, I really like that slide guitar part, and I think that's probably another thing that Harrison doesn't get enough credit for either is being able to play the guitar.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there was that time in the 60s where he was hanging out with Ravi Shankar, was kind of contemplating, maybe I should just become a sitar player and not a guitar player. And then he kind of realized, well, there's 1,000 people on the streets of India who can play better than me. Mm-hmm. But I do have some experience playing the guitar, and I can be a leader in that field. So why don't I kind of stick to that? And I'm glad he did. I mean, obviously his slide put some great texture on a lot of these songs.
Yeah, and we didn't need sitar on everything either.
No, that's a little far-fetched. Dylan's on lead, but Tom wrote it, and Tom comes in for the second parts here. So this is a Petty right that he kind of offered up to Bob.
Right, and that's the one thing I like also on this is that there are songs where person A wrote it but did not sing lead. Like you'd figure, well, I wrote this one, so I'm going to take the lead. And maybe this was one where, I mean, the Orbison one, no, obviously that was something different. But I mean, maybe did he try it and Dylan sounded better? I don't know.
And then apparently on the third, or volume 3, the second album, they tried Bob on all the tracks because he had to go and do some tour dates and stuff like that. So they kind of got him to sing all of it. And then they decided, which one he would actually be the lead on, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Good harmonies again from the guys on this, a lot of O's and Ah's. And then at the beginning, it's just having them all together. It's a kind of a special sound, man. We like the harmonies of Def Leppard. We like the harmonies of a lot of different bands. So this, even though it's kind of a quirky song, should be right up our alley from the harmonies.
Yeah, no, I do like this, even though it doesn't really fit in with the rest of this stuff. But that's, I think, kind of why I like this album too, is it doesn't all sound the same. And I think that comes from having multiple people writing songs.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we get to what I think is the most interesting track on the record, Tweeter and the Monkey Man. Mm-hmm. And it's easily the longest track. I mean, all the tracks are about 3.5 minutes or so. Rattle is only 3, but this is 5.5 minutes. And this is Dylan storytelling through and through. And apparently Tom played this at like Bonnaroo. And I had a buddy Stouffer who went to see Tom Petty. He's like, yeah, there was this one song he played. I didn't know what it was. Like, it was Tweeter and the Monkey. God, I'd kill to see him play that song. Because obviously there was never any kind of Wilbury tour. And Dylan probably, I don't know if he ever played it or not, to be honest, but he's got so many songs to choose from in his vast catalog. Who knows? But I mean, I guess Tom broke it out at some point, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd like to hear him do that. It definitely sounds like this was maybe one that Dylan had in his back pocket or he had been working on, because this doesn't sound like anything else. This sounds like Bob Dylan wrote this on his own and brought it in.
And just, I mean, it's almost like Hurricane with its storytelling here. Yeah. About, just first of all, you're in New Jersey, which is, where Hurricane took place. You're talking about drug dealers on the run, messing with the cops. It's very imagistic. It creates a story that you can really follow along.
Right. And I think he's got the line in there, in Jersey, everything's legal as long as you don't get caught.
That's right.
That's a very true statement, just so you know.
Just so you know, yeah. And what I never knew or didn't realize before doing some research for the show is that, it's like Tom and, first of all, Tom and Bob kind of wrote this together. Like, Harrison's like, Jeff and I were there, and Bob and Tom were kind of scribbling back and forth, and we weren't really that involved in it. It's like it was kind of their thing. Jeff may have contributed a little bit, but sometimes people regard this as a playful homage to Bruce Springsteen, who was often, tabbed as the next great songwriter, the next great kind of Bob Dylan type, because, first of all, it's set in New Jersey, which is Springsteen's home.
Right.
But some of you hear him mention Thunder Road, Down the Thunder Road in the song, which is a Bruce Springsteen song. Mansion on the Hill, which is a Bruce Springsteen song. State Trooper was a Bruce Springsteen song. Stolen Car, The River, Jersey Girl was a Springsteen song, even though Tom Waits wrote it. So there's so many little references to Springsteen titles in here. That's probably not by accident.
No, it couldn't be. It could. So is he paying homage to Springsteen, or is he saying "You'll Never Be Me"? Or I don't know what's going on here.
I don't know, but it's a hell of a story song. And talking about was Tweeter a crossdresser? Was Tweeter transsexual? There's some odd stuff in here. We're not really sure exactly what's going on. And the undercover cop had a sister named Jan who loved the Monkey Man. It's kind of an ominous song, and really you only hear the rest of the guys on the chorus, and the walls came down.
Yeah.
But Dylan telling the story, this is some great Dylan right here. And the fact that it ended up on a Wilburys album is cool, because, at the time, some of the stuff Dylan was doing wasn't really hitting all that big, and then it was 89 or 90 when Under the Red Sky came out. That didn't do as well as Oh Mercy, I don't feel like, so Bob's kind of hit and miss. This to me is Bob right down the middle, exactly what he ought to be doing.
Tweeter and the Monkey Man were hard up for cash. They stayed up all night selling cocaine and hash to an undercover cop who had a sister named Jan. For reasons unexplained, she loved the Monkey Man. Tweeter was a Boy Scout.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, even from the beginning, from the beginning track, Dylan and Petty, their voices kind of sound they're the most compatible out of all four of them. And it kind of sounds like their songwriting is the most compatible also.
Yeah, and they obviously got to know each other pretty well doing that tour together where Tom and the Heartbreakers were his backing band. So it makes sense. To me, this is a forgotten classic. They don't play it on the radio a lot because it's a little long, and it's kind of a rare track, but I think it's killer. I'm so glad it ended up on this album and not a Bob Dylan album, if just for the harmonies. And the fact that it stands out with all these 3.5 minute ditties. This is kind of a long story song, and this would obviously be in the top 10 for me.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a great find on this record, because you're not gonna hear it anywhere else. And I'm glad it's got a weird title too, like Tweeter the I don't even know what this is about. But if you listen to it, yeah, it's a great story song, and it almost kind of sounds like, who are these guys? These guys are storytellers, and this is like another chapter in the story they're telling you. Like, it's not all happy and shiny.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So coming to the last song of the album, End of the Line, which of course had the big video. They're kind of on a train, right?
Yeah, on a train. Yeah.
This was released the 23rd of January of '89, but Roy had died December 6th of '88. So he'd seen them get into the charts or whatever, but wasn't around for this song to be released. So when they did the video, they're all on the train, and then they had a rocking chair there with the black acoustic guitar in it. And so when it came to Roy's turn in the song, they just kind of made the thing rock and put the spotlight on him. Which I thought was a really cool tribute to Roy.
Well, I think because I went back and watched this video to get ready for the show, and yeah, they do that, and then it looks like they've got a little picture of him on a table, and it looks like everything kind of gets darker when his verse comes in and then it kind of lightens up again, kind of a tribute to him.
That's right. The whole place gets darker except for the spotlight on his rocking chair. Yeah, absolutely. But this is a Harrison song, so George does the first lead bit and he does the last lead bit. Jeff does the second bit and the second to last bit. Tom, in addition to playing bass, kind of does the interlude. Don't have to be ashamed of the car I drive. No Dylan lead vocals on this. He's only, in the background. But Roy did have the middle. So it's kind of like George first, then Jeff. Tom's doing the middle bits. Roy's in the middle. And then Jeff and then George kind of finishes it out. It's very upbeat. I always like this song. And Petty did play it with the Heartbreakers on the 2008 tour.
Oh, nice. And it's a nice upbeat way to end the record after the Dylan track.
Well, it's all right, riding around in the breeze. Well, it's all right, if you live the life you please. Well, it's all right, doing the best you can. Well, it's all right, as long as you lend a hand. You can sit around and wait for the phone to ring.
Absolutely. It hit the charts, number 2 U.S. album rock chart, 28 U.S. Adult Contemporary, hit top 10 in Canada and was a certified silver single in the UK, So again, they only released 2 singles, but they did pretty well. And then they knew after this, everyone was kind of going to go back to doing their own thing again. Dylan's got a tour. Tom's got to work on a record. Roy's got shows he's got to do, that kind of thing. But obviously with the death of Roy, then everybody kind of moving back to their own stuff. It's kind of a one and done. Yes, there was a second record, but it didn't really feature Roy, which just changes it just ever so slightly. It's not quite the same. This is the superest of all supergroups. And they only made one record, which is what happens to supergroups. Everybody's got something else they can go do. That's the point of a supergroup. Yes, it may be great when they're together, but they can all leave and do something else.
Right. And there, I think there was some, you mentioned that Harrison didn't really like to tour. And so, I mean, that tour like this was never really going to work. There was too many moving pieces. But he had some kind of idea about like renting an aircraft carrier or something. And then they could all live on it and travel around. And I mean, I understand that was pie in the sky, but to have seen them at least play a couple of the shows, that would have been awesome.
I know.
Yeah. So, I mean, a tour was never going to work, a large scale tour. There was just too many moving pieces.
Yeah. And apparently Tom was begging him to do it. Like, George, it's so much money, dude. We gotta do it, think about that. But the thing is, George did eventually do a tour of Japan, and this time he had Eric Clapton and his band backing him, the same band that I saw on the Journeyman tour in 1990 that included Nathan East, and I think Ray Cooper, who played on this album, was part of Eric's band at that time. Steve Ferroni, who would eventually join the Heartbreakers, was Eric's drummer at the time. So he went out and did that. He recorded an album, which I bought back in the day, which is pretty cool, live in Japan. And after that, he's like, well, maybe we could do some Wilbury shows, but I guess without Roy, it wouldn't be the same. Yeah. And Tom had now blown up to enormous heights, and Dylan's always got his own thing going. So it never came together, which is sad. Even if they just done one show and filmed it, that would have been amazing.
Correct. Yeah, in London, in New York, in LA, something like that. Yeah, at the Greek Theater. What if you could have had one record of them playing together? Yeah, that would have been great.
Now there were a couple of bonus tracks that came with the re-release. The first one was Maxine, which is obviously a Harrison Wright. I mean, just very obviously, and lots of acoustic overdubs. It almost sounds like an Irish folk song in the beginning to me. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot to the song. There's not a big solo or anything. He was probably left off because it wasn't 100% fleshed out, and it starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like Tom's counting off or whatever. It's like, yeah, you'd probably edit that out of a real song. And at the end, it's like, you can hear George say, okay, that's it. Yeah, and then the song's over, right?
I think it's only 2 minutes and change. Like it's not even 3 minutes long. So yeah, it definitely kind of does sound like an unfinished piece,
like an 85 to 90% finished song, like not quite. And the same with Like a Ship, which Dylan wrote and sang on. It's more 3.5 minutes, like most of the rest of the songs of the album. It's just not quite a finished song. I mean, it's cool that we got to hear it. Both of them. They both have drums on it. They both have good harmonies and stuff on it. But they're not 100% finished in my opinion.
And I think that's one of the things that I do like about this record is that they're all of the songs are short. So it gives you a chance to go from track to track. There's no big instrumental interludes. There's no freak out guitar solos. There really aren't any big riffs in this. It's basically just a vehicle for these guys to sing on.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, so they've all got momentum here now, and I Won't Back Down. Big song for Tom Petty on the next record. Well, who was in the video? Well, Jeff Lynne was in the video. George Harrison was in the video. Mike Campbell of the Heartbreakers, and then Ringo Starr.
Ringo, yeah.
And what was the VJ's name? Kevin, he had dark hair. You remember that guy on MTV?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, yes.
Kevin Seal.
Okay.
I remember him introducing the video one night. It's like, there's 2 Heartbreakers, there's 3 Wilburys, and there's 2 Beatles. So there must be 7 people in this video, kind of thing. But I just remember it being a big deal, having Ringo on there. And George, he's back doing his stuff again. Good to see Mike back, because that Tom considers Mike Campbell his co-pilot. Doesn't really want to work without him.
Yeah, that was a thing on that Wildflowers deal where it was like, is this going to be a Heartbreaker record? Is it going to be a Tom Petty record? What are we going to do on this? And they're like, well, if we have Howie and we have Stan and everybody, it would be a Heartbreaker record. So there was never any question of Mike Campbell. Like, he's not, like, is he going to be on the record or is he not? He's there, and then we'll see if we get the other guys or not.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing about Wildflowers. The only one who really wasn't on it was Stan.
And that was his fault.
And he left. He basically was done after that. And they brought Steve Peroni in because he was available.
Mm-hmm.
He gelled with them well. And then he joined the Heartbreakers thereafter, and Tom would always say the best record we as a collective, the Heartbreakers, ever did was Wildflowers. When it's technically not a Heartbreakers record. It's a Tom Petty record, but it's got, after that came out, it's got the Heartbreakers lineup on it,
Yeah, right.
So, but of course, now what tragically is, yes, Roy died while it was on the charts, while it was still brand new. And since then, George died. And then sadly, Tom Petty did, the youngest of the Wilburys.
Mm-hmm.
He died. So now the only people left are Bob Dylan and Jeff Lynne, which is sad. But, you lost Roy 35 years ago, right? So, these people are getting older. George, suffered a brutal attack by a would-be murderer, which, he survived it, but he didn't live a hell of a Tom, I think, died from a mix of all the different medicines that he was on. Right after he finished, they basically said, this is the last big tour. Not that we're never going to play again, but like, this is the last big tour. I got to see him. I was really psyched about it. Joe Walsh opened for him. And then, Tom Petty left us. So I feel like this is an important part of all the folks who passed away's legacy. Important for Jeff Lynne, maybe least important to Bob Dylan, if I had to guess.
I would say you're probably right, because I think Bob Dylan would have existed regardless of this record.
And he's carried on doing his thing, releasing records when he wants to.
If you're a Bob Dylan fan, you're going to listen to whatever he puts out, and he doesn't. I don't think he's ever really cared about whether you like me or not. This is what I'm going to do. So it was nice that he was part of this, but yeah, you're right. I don't think this really affected him one way or the other.
Right. Whereas, Tom Petty, this was big for him. And then because of this, he got Full Moon Fever, which is the biggest album he ever did, which is the biggest album any of them ever did. This was big for George because it was kind of put him back in the spotlight and made him happy to be making music again. It was big for Jeff Lynne because then he gets to produce everybody's albums. He gets to produce the first Beatles song in 25 years or whatever it is with Free as a Bird. That's a huge deal. He gets to keep ELO going. And obviously it was huge for Roy because he'd never been in the charts for 2 decades. And now he's back and he was psyched. And it's sorry that he lost his life. But so I feel like as far as everyone's legacy goes, this plays an important role, but least of which I'd have to say is Dylan's.
Yeah, it's interesting. You probably the top 2 are either Harrison and or Orbison, and I would say Harrison only because this really cemented him as, kind of got him out of the Beatles' shadow. I mean, I know Cloud 9 had come out, but this was really like, it was his band. He did this. I think it reminded people that he was just as much of a part of the Beatles' success as John and Paul and John.
Yeah. Yeah. And he deserves that credit. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. He was, I mean, he calls himself the dark horse. He had the track dark horse, but I mean, this really kind of cemented, at least I think to our generation of people, that, yeah, this dude was a powerhouse on his own.
Yeah. And All Things Must Pass, which was the triple album that came out after the demise of the Beatles, I think is the best solo album any of the Beatles ever made. Of course, he had all these tracks saved up that he couldn't get on a Beatles record. So he's like, all right, I'll just save it. I'll just save it. And it had What Is Life on it. And it had My Sweet Lord on it. And it was, it's fantastic. He's really my favorite. I love Paul McCartney and everything. And he's been fairly prolific, but I just feel like George had the coolest solo career. Those Beatles. He didn't tour a lot. He didn't really like to tour. He didn't love performing live all the time, but he made some great records.
Right, and I think that's what came through for me on this documentary. Is I don't think he really ever wanted to be a solo artist. I think he did because he kind of had to.
Right.
I think really he was more comfortable in a band setting.
I think so, and a great collaborator. Petty tells a story about how they were playing ukuleles. Basically, George is teaching Tom how to play the ukulele. So they're walking around the garden, playing their chords and strumming, and he's teaching him how to do it. And he's like, I'm going to give you a ukulele. And Tom's like, well, you gave me this one. This is all I need. He's like, no, we might need more ukuleles. So he goes over to his car and he opens it up. I don't know if there's a half dozen or a dozen ukes in there or something like that. And Tom's like, what are you doing with all these ukuleles in your car? It's kind of weird, and yet it's kind of awesome. You're giving me one and teaching me how to play it and stuff like that. So apparently that's what George always traveled with, because it's easy to take on a plane and it doesn't take up a lot of space. And basically those four strings get the bottom four strings of the guitar anyway. So you can play a uke, you can play those things.
Yeah, and you can get your point across with a much smaller instrument. That's one of those things where, like, if you said, George Harrison has 12 ukuleles in the back of his car, you're like, no, he doesn't. But that makes sense that he would. Okay, I can see that going either way. Of course he does.
So in light of all the heaviness that we've been doing in the book reviews, like, let's take a step back. Let's do something just a little different. And this was a fun listen.
I think it was too. And if you're only familiar with Handle with Care, Last Night, and End of the Line, you're going to be pleasantly surprised with the rest of this record.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our take on Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. It's a fun album to go back and listen to. It was big, I guess, when we were in high school. We're starting to get into that harder rock stuff, so it probably wasn't our favorite at the time, but those two big singles, Handle with Care and End of the Line, were big on MTV. They were big on rock radio, and it was huge for all the guys in the band. It was really cool to see these legends all come together and have some fun and make a cool record. I think it surprised Jackson that I wanted to do it, but when I saw it was coming up on a 35th anniversary, I thought, you know what, that's a cool album. It's kind of a cool story within the story of all these guys, all these legends, amazing careers. And quite frankly, we recorded this in the summer when we had been doing a lot of heavy metal. So I needed something a little bit lighter there. And you may have noticed that our sound was a little off. I was still in the middle of moving around and trying to get the sound right as we move back to America here. So hopefully this is the last show that has that kind of issue with my voice on it. But we appreciate you listening either way. And if you go back and listen to Traveling Wilburys, I think you'll like it. And Volume 3 was pretty good too. It wasn't quite the same because there's no Roy. And I feel like the bloom was off the rose a little bit. They all kind of felt like they'd done it already. And it was more of a Tom Petty thing because he was just so hot at the time. But at any rate, we hope you enjoy it here. And we appreciate you listening. And we appreciate you downloading and subscribing wherever you get your podcast. And folks, if you're enjoying the show, do us a big favor. Go in and give us a positive review. It really doesn't matter where you get your podcast. If you give us a positive review, it's just a huge help to us. It helps us find more rock and roll fans like you, help you grow the show, help us get better guests. And if we hear it, or if we see it, if you send it to us, we may just read it on the show. So as usual, folks, we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You got to let us know. Email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You tell us the bands, the albums, the concerts, the DVDs, the rock properties that you want to hear us talk about on the show. Thanks, of course, to Pantheon Podcast for making us a part of the family. And thanks to our sponsors, rarevinyl.com, where I'm not sure if they have any Traveling Wilburys stuff, but I know they got a ton of Beatles stuff. I know they've got Bob Dylan stuff. I know they've got ELO stuff. I bet they've got Roy Orbison and Tom Petty stuff. Go to rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY. Save 10% off anything you buy from any band. It's a great deal. Some fun stuff coming up on The Wolf that we can't wait to tell you about. But until then, to all of you rock and rollers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.